This all happened over the span of a couple weeks, and it's pushed me away from working late anymore. Not after last night. I thought it was over, but last night told me otherwise. I'm a software developer, which means that when a deadline comes up, that deadline is rock solid for me. It's either stay late to meet it or get an earful from my boss. So, with multiple milestones set up, I had to stay late more than a few times to meet those goals. My wife wasn't happy, since we have 3 kids that are all below the age of 6. They can be a handful, and my wife wants a break when I get home from work. But regardless, deadlines were deadlines. It was actually kind of nice staying late. The office lights turned down automatically, and I was the only one the team was relying on, so I was there alone. I could turn on my background music and happily code away. The first night of this project, I was bobbing my head to some AC/DC when I heard something walking around the cubicle farm. It was about 6 p.m., so maybe not everybody had left yet. I turned my music off and stood up to see who it was. The cleaning lady was making her way down the aisle behind me, wheeling a large garbage bin that she dumped each cubicle's trash into. We locked eyes and smiled politely, and she kept walking. I sat back down and plugged in my headphones instead. When the cleaning lady got to my cubicle, I just smiled again. She ignored me and grabbed my trash bin, dumped it, and then moved on. I shrugged when she left. She wasn't being paid to be friendly, and it really wasn't my problem. An hour churned by, and I was making some small headway towards the deadline. I figured I'd give it one more hour before I left. Taking a break to stretch, I pulled off my headphones and stood up. I raised my arms above my head and yawned. That's when my fingers brushed up against something soft, like dangling strings, or hair. Immediately, I dropped my hands and looked up, but there was nothing there. The ceiling was about 6 feet above my head, and there was nothing hanging down around me either. Startled, I sat down and got back to work. I only put one headphone back in because I was feeling a little bit paranoid now. It took me a little bit to get back into the groove of things, but eventually I started back with my work. Soon after, I started hearing shuffling footsteps in the cubicle farm. They sounded like shoes grinding against the short carpet, never lifting from the floor while someone walked. The movement was rhythmic, just like footsteps. I pulled out my one headphone and stood to look at who was still there. Empty. And the sound had stopped. I swallowed and I decided that was enough for tonight. I saved all my work, pushed my files to the staging server, and began to pack my bag. On my way to the door, I looked out over the cubicles. Nobody was there, and no source of light came from any of the cubicles either. My fear instantly dissipated when I walked downstairs and out the side door. The parking lot was far brighter and the summer air was warm and inviting. At work the next day, I told my coworkers about what had happened and I got varied responses, mostly chuckles at my expense. I worked fine through the day and was distracted because of my wife's response when I got home. I won't go into detail, but she definitely was not happy. Because of her response the day before, I had agreed to bring my computer home and work from there instead of staying late. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. I spent hours that night cursing and swearing while I tried to get my files from the server so I could do some work. I had never worked from home before, so configuring the VPN was giving me a hard time. No matter what I did, I could never get full access to the server. I didn't get a single line of code written that night, and I told my wife that if I couldn't get it right the next day, then I'd have to stay late again. She apologized, and we made up for our fight. After hours of trying, I got a hold of our IT department at around 5 p.m., right as they were getting ready to leave. They said, "I'm sorry, but we don't allow any direct uploads or downloads to the server from VPN connections. It's just a safety feature. We can allow this for your account, but only for one day at a time." I thought this was kind of bullshit. I mean, I get it. The IT, they're just trying to cover their butts, but this was a little overboard, I thought. I asked, can you enable it for my account so I can work from home tonight? Sorry, I'm just about to leave and I don't have time to set that up. Submit a ticket and I'll do it tomorrow. Grumbling, I did submit the ticket. It was already after 5 at that point, so I decided that instead of interrupting my thought process, I'd stay for a couple hours since my wife was already expecting me to. I could have downloaded the necessary files to my computer and worked on them at home, but I was already on a roll. I don't think I'd be able to focus as well when I got home. I told my wife that I was staying and got to work. At around 6, the cleaning lady came. I smiled, but once again she just moved on with her work. I shrugged it off and decided to put my music back on speakers once she had moved on. Once she left, I blasted my music. A few songs later, there was a huge thump behind me. The sound was distant, down the hall, but it sounded like someone had dropped a chair. There wasn't a clatter of metal or anything, just the resounding thump of something heavy hitting the floor. Confused, I turned down my music and stood up to look. I couldn't see down the hall from my vantage point. The hallway was black as pitch beyond my windowed work area. The angle of the lights made it look like the darkness was spilling into my room rather than the light spilling into the hallway. It was eerie. Remembering last time's events, I sat down with the hairs in the back of my neck raised. The music quietly played on my speakers, just enough to barely obscure the shuffling footsteps again. They were coming from the hallway. I slammed my hand on the mute button and turned around. The shuffling continued, and I could tell that whoever it was slowly advancing down the hall toward my work area. The darkness of the hall gave cover to whoever it was. I could only hear them slowly coming towards the room. The footsteps were slowing down and dragging out for longer. Whoever it was stayed in the darkness of the hallway, and I couldn't make out a body or shape or literally anything. My heart was racing, my hands grew cold, and I could feel myself holding my breath, but unable to release it. One final step. And then there was silence. My jaw clenched involuntarily, and I wished that the footsteps had continued. The silence was more unbearable than the shuffling. Tinnitus, triggered by the absence of noise, rang in my ears, and it put me even more on edge. If it was moving, I couldn't hear it because of the ringing. I stood there, staring at the darkness hovering in the hallway. I wondered if it could see me. I wondered if it was staring right back at me. What was it thinking about? What was running through its mind? I was certain that it wasn't it. Not a he or a she. An it. My confidence was waning. My brain started to play tricks on me, and I swore that I saw movement in the dark. The noise grew in the pitch, and it was driving me insane, lowering my resolve. I decided to turn up the volume on the music to give myself at least a little bit of confidence. I took one step backwards, then two. With a feeling hand, I groped for the volume control. I found that I wasn't close enough to my keyboard and jerked my head for only a second. I hit the unmute button, and just as I did, I saw something bolt out of the corner of my eye. My gaze spun back to the hallway just in time to glance something dart down the second hallway, going to its left and away from me. The office was laid out like a ladder, with work areas sectioned off on each side of the poles, and small hallways occasionally connecting the two sides. The thing had ran out into the dark hallway and down one of the other paths that led to another part of the office. But what got me riled up was the part that I had seen darting down the dim hallway. A long length of hair, trailing behind a head. My brain was too far gone to think of this thing as a human. Whatever it was, it only looked human. I stumbled when it darted around the corner, and it was only around 6:30 p.m., but I had no desire to stay there any longer. I shut my laptop where it was, packed it up, and walked towards the stairs. The workspace on the other side also had a door leading to the same stairwell, which we share. Just as I reached the top stair, which was on my side of the stairwell, I looked up and felt a lurch in my throat. The door to the other work area was open, and someone was standing on the other side of the wall. I could tell because a few locks of hairs were dangling just inside the door. It was standing just around the corner of the door, close enough that its hair was hanging out of the door frame. That's when I bolted, taking the stairs 2 and 3 at a time. I didn't start breathing until I threw open the door to the parking lot. I didn't feel like I was being chased, but I still ran until I reached my car. I threw open my door, jumped in, tossed my bag in the passenger seat, and drove away as fast as possible. The darkly curious part of me wanted to look at the windows where my work area was, but the same part of me didn't want to. My heart didn't calm down until I arrived at home. I didn't tell my wife about what had happened. I passed off my stress and anxiety as fear about my deadlines. She believed me and even let me go to bed early so I could feel better in the morning. The whole thing felt like a dream the next day. The sunlight invited calmness. I sucked in a deep breath and made my way to work. I didn't tell my coworkers about the previous night this time. They had forgotten about my last story and everybody was dead focused on the project. I had to make up some technical problem for why I hadn't finished the section I'd promised the day before. I assured the project manager that I'd be ready on time and that I'd be back on track that night. I had no plans to stay late though. IT didn't fix my access that day, which is typical for my company, so I downloaded every file that I thought I'd need at the end of the day and took my work home. No way in hell I was staying late again, no matter how relaxed I was feeling now. The fear had worn down after a night's rest, but I didn't want to repeat. At home, I got caught up. Barely. The distractions from the night before had me pretty far behind, but I managed to get everything done that I had been assigned. Relieved, I was able to go to bed at a regular time with my wife. I could tell that my coming home and working was straining her, but to her credit, she didn't say anything. Besides, it wasn't like I could really help it. The product version launched and I was able to work from home every time I was needed. IT eventually did fix my access, but I found it easier just to download what I needed rather than request access every single day. In the mornings, I'd come in and upload my changes without any issues. The nightmare had almost been forgotten. Then came corporate, the monster that ruins everything. "We want your team to love each other," they said. And for the next product version launch, once a week, the team would have to stay 2 hours late for unpaid overtime. The business would order pizzas on their tab, and we were all supposed to work together on our parts and get ahead of it as much as possible. Apparently, I wasn't the only member who had fallen behind, and instead of giving us more time for future deadlines, they required overtime. It was absolute bullshit, and everybody was pissed. Nobody wanted to stay late, but corporate gets what corporate wants. The first week, everybody stayed without enthusiasm, and barely any more work got done. But still, the corporate managers toted about increased teamwork and better morale, so the overtime was scheduled to continue. Everybody was pissed, and so everybody tried to find a way around it. Most people did find a way. If they were a designer, they worked ahead and got things done to a point that they had no work to do when overtime came. Same with content writers, graphic artists, and any other team that could work ahead. The coders were the ones that were left to do all the extra work. We couldn't do our jobs until everybody else did theirs, and the other teams had done so much of their job that we actually had too much work to do. More than we could even complete. So, with that, we were the ones that were forced to stay late. I'm giving you this detail so you'll see how I ended up staying late again, even after all that happened to me. When the time came to go home, I was required to stay a little bit longer. I was in charge of the code reviews this week and it had to be done that night, according to my manager. No leniency for me. While everybody went home, I was left to finish all the code reviews of 3 people who had been working their asses off all day so they could leave on time. I was pissed and I just wanted to get through it as fast as possible. I'd practically forgotten about the past terrors because I was so angry. I pushed my headphones in tighter and dug into their code. I thought my headphones were faulty. Every little while, no matter what song I played, there'd be this little dinging sound. I took them out and stared at them, shook them, scraped earwax out of them, but nothing worked. I was already in a bad mood, so I yanked them out of the headphone jack and tossed them into the next cubicle. The song I was playing jumped to using the speakers and kept working like that. A minute or so later, I heard the ding again. I closed my eyes in annoyance. There must be some alert or some program that was trying to give me a notification. I hit pause on YouTube and worked in silence, waiting for the notification to sound. Just as I was taking a sip of my drink, I heard the ding again. It was faint, but still loud enough to penetrate my headphones. I say that it had to get past my headphones because it wasn't coming from my computer. It was coming from down the hall. The ding was the sound of the elevator arriving at my floor. There was one other workspace between my area and the elevators. That distance muffed the sound before it got to me, but the pitch was high enough that I could hear it through my music. I wish that I just made my music louder. Now all the memories from weeks ago came flooding back. I couldn't help but turn my head to look at the dark hallway that led to the elevators. Whatever had come here last time had arrived again. I strained to hear shuffling footsteps, but there was nothing. I made my own sounds on purpose so I could keep the awful ringing away. The elevator had arrived again. I sucked in a deep breath. I still had a lot of work to do, and I'd be in deep shit if I came in the next day without completing the work. I had two options: stay and finish, or download and take it home. And I opted for the second option. Sitting down, I began downloading the files. There were well over 50 individual files, each of which contained small snippets of code that needed to be reviewed. Our stupid software only allowed you to select and download one file at a time, so I had to sit there and manually click each file. I began to laugh to myself, a response triggered by the intense fear. Here I am, I thought, being haunted by some being, and I'm still worried about a lecture from my boss. I actually laughed out loud at that. When my giggling ended, I heard that now familiar shuffling. My throat lurched and all humor left the situation. The elevator dings had ceased, and now it was just the shuffling of my frantic mouse clicks. Come on, I mumbled while my hands shook. I clicked on the second to last file just as a noise made me jump and bash the keyboard. The stairwell to my left had made a sound of this heavy security door opening and closing. Someone was coming in from the parking lot. Heaving a sigh of relief, I clicked the last file and hit download. The shuffling had stopped, probably scared off by whoever was coming up. I stuffed my laptop into my bag, heaved it over my shoulder, and briskly walked to the stairwell. I rounded that corner just in time to gasp, slip back, and land on the tile floor with a crash, legs dangling down the first two steps. Something was standing on the stairs, 2 or 3 feet down from me. Just looking at it gave me double vision. It was like it stood in 4 places at the same time, and all 4 of them were twitching. I couldn't even see a general shape. The shadow or figure was just shapeless. Scrambling, I grabbed the door handle to the stairwell. My hands were sweating as I pulled myself up. I didn't see the thing again. I only got a quick glimpse of it that moment before the fear took over. All pretenses at normality were gone now. I ran full speed with my bag over my shoulder. If the thing was behind me, then I was fine passing through the black stretch of hallway to the next work area. It felt like the darkness swallowed me whole, then spat me out on the other side. It felt tangible. I looked back to make sure I wasn't being pursued. That was a mistake. Just as I shot a glance back, I saw that thing duck back into the ceiling. There was a hole where one of the ceiling tiles should have been in. It had been leaning out of the ceiling to watch my progress. I didn't even process this until after. All I knew was that it was still after me. I passed through the huge fire door that separated this work area from the main staircase and elevators. I'd take the big staircase down and exit through the main entrance, I thought. Just as I rounded that corner, I stopped and skidded to a complete stop. The stairs were on the right, but on the left. The elevator dinged and the doors started to close. But they couldn't close. A hand was stretched out from inside the elevator, just sticking out. I couldn't see who or what was inside the elevator, but when the doors tried to close, the sensors detected the arm and opened back up with an almost annoyed ding. Whatever this was, it was physical. The elevator doors had detected it. The spectacle only took half a second, and I took the scene in over the span of a second. Then I spun and ran for the staircase. I jumped for the first landing, then down to the first floor. I ran for the revolving door in the lobby, running past the security sensors without sliding my card. The alarms blared, but I just kept running. The door was heavy and unpowered, but I managed to shove the door around until I could squeeze out through the gap and run for the parking lot. I managed to make it to my car, throw myself in, and escape. I didn't look at the windows like the last time. The tears came once I peeled out of the lot. That was last night. This morning, at work, everything has been normal. No one has said anything about the alarm, and I just finished my code reviews this morning after a fitful sleep. I told my manager that I don't want to work late again, and I tried to be as logical about it as possible. She said she'd get back to me. If I have to work late again alone, I'm going to quit. I'm never working late here again. Ever.